The thunder crashed against the New Mexico sky as Maverick Everly rode into truth or consequences, his tired stallion plodding through mud that seemed determined to claim them both. The year was 1887, and the promise of silver in the nearby mountains had drawn prospectors and desperados alike to this once quiet settlement along the Rio Grande. Rain pelted his wide-brimmed hat as lightning illuminated the main street, revealing a scene that halted his exhausted journey. There, between the saloon and the general store, a woman knelt in the mud, her shoulders heaving with silent sobs, her once fine dress ruined by the elements. Maverick dismounted, his spurs sinking into the muck as he approached her. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. A true gentleman never leaves a lady in distress. At 26, he'd seen enough of the West's cruelty to be cautious, but something about her vulnerability pierced through his trail-hardened exterior. "Madam," he said, his voice gentle despite having to compete with the storm, "you'll catch your death out here." When she didn't respond, he crouched down beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Mud had spattered her face, mingling with tears that continued to fall. "Madam," he tried again, reaching slowly into his pocket for a handkerchief. "Whatever trouble you're in, it ain't worth pneumonia." With a tentative hand, he lifted her chin until her eyes met his. The sorrow he found there was staggering, but beneath it flickered something else, a resilience that resonated with him. Her gaze widened slightly as she took in his features, perhaps seeing the compassion he couldn't hide. "I've lost everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. Maverick offered his handkerchief, which she accepted with trembling fingers. "I'm Maverick Everly, and I don't believe anyone who's still breathing has lost everything." "Melody Edwards," she replied, attempting to wipe mud from her face. "And you don't understand, they've taken my father's store, everything we built." Maverick glanced toward the general store, noting the new sign being erected despite the downpour. Banks don't usually foreclose during rainstorms. "It wasn't the bank," she said, anger momentarily overtaking despair. "It was the Blackwell Gang. They've been buying up businesses, forcing people out. My father," her voice broke, "they shot him when he refused to sign the deed." Maverick's jaw tightened. He'd heard of the Blackwell Gang moving into territorial businesses, using a combination of legal trickery and outright violence to build their empire. What had started with cattle rustling had evolved into something more insidious. "Is there somewhere safe you can go?" he asked. Melody shook her head. "We lived above the store, everything I own was in there." The rain intensified, and Maverick made a decision. "Miss Edwards, I can't bring your father back, and I can't promise to fix whatever's happened here, but I can get you out of this storm." He stood, offering his hand. "There's a boarding house at the end of the street. Let me help you there, at least for tonight." She hesitated, studying him with wary eyes. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "Because out here," he said with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "all we've got is each other. The land takes everything else." After a long moment, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to help her to her feet. Her legs buckled, and he caught her elbow, steadying her. Leading her to his horse, he removed his duster and wrapped it around her shoulders before helping her into the saddle. Taking the reins, he led the horse through the muddy street toward the flickering lantern of the boarding house. The proprietress, Mrs. Olivia Hanson, took one look at Melody's bedraggled state and ushered her inside, clucking sympathetically. Maverick paid for a week's lodging in advance, ignoring Melody's protests. "I can't accept charity," she insisted as Mrs. Hanson bustled away to prepare a hot bath. "It's not charity," Maverick replied. "It's a loan. Once you're back on your feet, you can pay me back if it makes you feel better." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair plastered to his forehead. "Truth is, Miss Edwards, I came to truth or consequences looking for work. I hear there's mining operations that need security. If you know anything about honest employment in these parts, consider the room payment for information." Melody studied him, her guard still evident but softening. "You're not from around here. Colorado originally. been drifting since the war. He didn't specify which war at his age, it could only be the one that had torn the nation apart. "Thank you for the room, Mrs. Hanson," he called as the older woman returned. "You're not staying?" Melody asked, surprise evident in her voice. "There's a livery at the end of the street." "I need to see to my horse, then find myself a room." He settled his hat back on his head. "Rest, Miss Edwards. Tomorrow's time enough to figure out what comes next." As he turned to leave, she called after him, "Mr. Everly, thank you. Not many would stop for a stranger in the mud." He tipped his hat. "Get some rest, Miss Edwards." The livery was nearly empty, a testament to the town's changing fortunes. The stableman, an elderly fellow named Bartholomew Jenkins, took Maverick's stallion with appreciative hands. "Fine animal," he commented, running gnarled fingers along the horse's flank. Morgan quarter mix," Maverick confirmed. "Name's Thunder, he's earned his rest tonight." "That he has," Jenkins agreed. "You looking for a place to bed down? I've got a clean hay loft." 3 bits and it's yours for the night." Maverick considered his dwindling funds. The room at the boarding house had taken more than he'd planned to spend, but the woman's situation had stirred something in him. "Deal," he said, counting out the coins. As he climbed the ladder to the loft, his thoughts returned to Melody Edwards. There was something about her that compelled him, not just her beauty, though that was evident even beneath the mud and tears. It was the flicker of determination he'd seen when she'd mentioned her father. He recognized it because he'd carried the same flame after losing his own family to raiders during the war. Sleep came fitfully. Dreams of his past mingling with images of the woman he'd found kneeling in the mud. Morning arrived with clear skies and the bustle of a town returning to life after the storm. Maverick washed in the horse trough, drawing amused glances from passing townspeople, then made his way to the small cafe adjacent to the mercantile. He was halfway through a plate of eggs and beans when Melody Edwards entered. She'd cleaned up remarkably well. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly at her nape, and she wore a simple blue dress that had seen better days but suited her slender frame. Several men turned to watch her progress through the room, but her eyes found Maverick immediately. "May I join you?" she asked, her voice stronger than the previous night. He stood, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please." As she sat, the waitress approached and Melody ordered coffee and toast. "I'm afraid that's all I can manage today," she explained when the woman departed. From her reticule, she withdrew a small leather pouch. "For the room," she said, sliding it across the table. Maverick made no move to take it. "I told you it's a loan once you're settled." "I'm selling my mother's brooch today," she explained. "It's the only thing of value I managed to hide when they came." Her composure wavered momentarily before she straightened her shoulders. "I can't be beholden to a stranger, Mr. Everly." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded, accepting the pouch. "Then at least let me help you sell it for a fair price. Jewelers tend to see a desperate woman and offer half what something's worth." "And why would you do that?" "Because I'd like to think someone would do the same for my sister, if she were in your position." He didn't mention that his sister had been dead for 12 years, killed alongside their parents. Some stories were best left untold during breakfast. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of 3 men, their expensive suits and polished boots marking them as out of place among the town's more weathered inhabitants. The tallest of the 3, a man with a waxed mustache and cold eyes, surveyed the room before his gaze settled on Melody. "Miss Edwards," he said, approaching their table with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'd heard you were still in town. I thought perhaps you'd taken the stage yesterday." Melody's knuckles whitened as she gripped her coffee cup. "Mr. Preston." "I was unaware the Blackwell Gang was concerned with my travel plans." The man, Preston, affected a wounded expression. "Such harsh words. We're simply businessmen, making investments in growing communities like Truth or Consequences." "Your father's unfortunate accident, murder," Melody interrupted, her voice low but steady. "You murdered him." Preston's smile tightened. The coroner ruled it self-defense. Your father drew on Mr. Blackwell's associates when they came to complete a legitimate business transaction. My father never owned a gun in his life, she retorted. He was a shopkeeper, not a gunslinger. Nevertheless, Preston continued smoothly, the property transfer has been completed and filed with the county clerk. I came to offer you passage on today's stage to Santa Fe. A fresh start, courtesy of Mr. Blackwell. Maverick watched the exchange silently, measuring the man before him. Preston carried himself with the confidence of someone who rarely encountered resistance, and the bulge beneath his expensive jacket suggested he was armed. I'm not leaving, Melody said firmly. This was my home long before Victor Blackwell decided to add it to his collection. Preston's smile vanished. Don't be foolish, girl. There's nothing for you here now. Take the offer while it stands. The lady said she's staying, Maverick interjected, setting down his fork. Preston's attention shifted, taking in Maverick's trail-worn appearance and the revolver holstered at his hip. And you are, just passing through, Maverick replied easily. But I don't much care for men who pressure women during breakfast. A tense silence fell over the cafe as other patrons sensed the confrontation brewing. Preston measured Maverick for several seconds before his artificial smile returned. Another time, perhaps, he said to Melody. The stage leaves at noon if you reconsider. With a nod to his companions, he departed, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne. Friend of yours? Maverick asked once they'd gone. Preston's Blackwell's right hand, Melody explained, her appetite apparently gone as she pushed away her barely touched toast. He arranges the legitimate business transactions that have claimed half the businesses in town over the past year. And the law allows this. Sheriff Collins disappeared 3 months ago. The deputy who replaced him receives regular payments from Blackwell's men. She sighed, rubbing her temples. I should leave. There's nothing for me here anymore. What would your father want you to do? The question seemed to catch her off guard. He built that store from nothing when I was just a child. After my mother died, it was all we had. She gazed out the window toward the general store, now sporting a new sign, Blackwell Mercantile. He wouldn't run. Maverick nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. Then we'll need to be smarter than Preston and his boss. She focused on him with renewed intensity. Mr. Everly, you've been kind, but this isn't your fight. Maybe not, he agreed. But I came to truth or consequences looking for work, and it seems like someone needs to stand up to Blackwell and his operation. Besides, he added with the faintest smile, I've never much liked bullies. For the first time since he'd met her, Melody Edwards smiled a genuine expression that transformed her face and sent an unexpected warmth through Maverick's chest. You don't even know me, she said, echoing her words from the previous night. I know enough, he replied. Now about that brooch. They spent the morning visiting the town's sole jeweler, who offered a price for Melody's mother's brooch that even Maverick deemed fair. With money in her reticule, Melody insisted on repaying him for the room, then purchased a few necessities, a change of clothes, a hairbrush, and a small derringer that could be concealed in a pocket. Have you ever fired one of those? Maverick asked as they left the gunsmith shop. My father didn't believe in violence, she admitted, but he also believed in being practical. Then we should practice, he said. No sense carrying it if you can't use it. They spent the afternoon on the outskirts of town, where Maverick set up empty bottles on a fallen log. Melody's first attempts went wide, but by the third round she was hitting the target consistently. You're a natural, Maverick observed, impressed by her determination. I hope I never have to use it, she replied, carefully reloading, but Preston and his men. They made it clear what happens to women who stand in their way. The implication chilled Maverick's blood. Has he threatened you directly? Not in so many words, but after my father. She trailed off, focusing intently on the derringer. Some of the women who worked at the millinery said the new owner made certain expectations clear. When they refused, they were found beaten in an alley behind the saloon. Maverick's jaw tightened. We need to learn more about Blackwell's operation. Who owns what, where his men stay, how many there are? Why? Melody asked. I appreciate your help, Mr. Everly, but what do you plan to do? One man against Blackwell's entire organization. I plan to find the weak spots, he replied. Every operation has them. And I'm not as alone as you might think. What do you mean? Maverick hesitated. He hadn't planned to share his real purpose in truth or consequences, but something about Melody Edwards made him want to trust her. I'm not just looking for work, I'm looking for information about Blackwell. Her eyes widened. You're a lawman. No, he said with a short laugh. Nothing so official. Let's just say Blackwell's activities have caught the attention of certain business interests in Colorado and Texas. Interests that don't appreciate his methods of expansion. You're working for his competitors. She looked uncertain. I'm gathering information, Maverick corrected. What happens after that depends on what I find. He studied her expression, seeing the conflict there. This doesn't change anything about helping you, Miss Edwards. That's separate. She considered this for a long moment, then nodded. Then I can help you. I know this town better than anyone. I know who Blackwell has bought and who might still be persuaded to stand against him. It could be dangerous, he warned. My father is dead, she replied simply. What more can they take from me? As the sun began its descent, they returned to town, parting ways at the boarding house with an agreement to meet for breakfast the following morning. Maverick found more permanent lodging at a small rooming house run by a widow named Mrs. Reynolds, who charged less than the livery and offered actual meals. That night, he penned a letter to his contact in Denver, detailing what he'd learned about Blackwell's operation in Truth or Consequences. As he sealed the envelope, Maverick acknowledged to himself that his interest in staying had as much to do with Melody Edwards as with his assignment. There was something about her courage in the face of overwhelming odds that resonated with him, and something about the way her rare smile transformed her face that made him want to see it again. Over the next week, they established a routine. Mornings were spent gathering information, Melody introducing him to townspeople who had resisted Blackwell's advances, Maverick making notes of the gang's patterns and habits. Afternoons often found them practicing with the Derringer, or when Melody felt confident enough, with Maverick's revolver. You're a good teacher, she remarked one day as they walked back toward town. Were you always skilled with firearms? My father taught me, Maverick replied. He believed every man should know how to hunt and how to protect his family. The memory of his father, tall and strong in Maverick's childhood memories, brought the familiar ache. He was right about that, at least. You don't speak of your family often, Melody observed. Neither do you, he countered gently. She smiled ruefully. Fair enough. My mother died when I was 10, influenza. My father raised me on his own after that, teaching me the business so I could take over someday. Her expression darkened. Blackwell took that future from me. We'll find a way to get it back, Maverick promised, though he wasn't entirely sure how. Their investigation revealed that Blackwell's operation was more extensive than either had imagined. Beyond Truth or Consequences, he controlled businesses in 3 neighboring towns, creating a network of commerce that channeled profits back to his headquarters in Santa Fe. His men, a mixture of hired guns and corrupt former lawmen, enforced his will through intimidation and violence, while his lawyers ensured everything appeared legitimate on paper. He's creating an empire, Melody said one evening as they reviewed their findings in a corner of the cafe. If someone doesn't stop him, he'll control the entire territory. Not if we can expose him, Maverick replied. The territorial governor can't ignore evidence of murder and extortion, especially if it threatens commerce. Evidence, Melody repeated skeptically. Everyone knows what happened to my father, but no one will testify. They're too afraid. Then we need to catch them in the act, Maverick said. Something so public and egregious that it can't be ignored. Their opportunity came unexpectedly the following day. As they passed the bank, they witnessed an argument between the banker, Henry Mitchell, and Preston. Mitchell, a stout man with mutton chop whiskers, was refusing to sign something, his face red with indignation. "I'll not falsify loan documents," he was saying as they approached. "It's fraud and I won't be party to it." "Mr. Blackwell will be disappointed," Preston replied smoothly. "He values your cooperation in his business ventures." "Tell Blackwell he can take his business ventures elsewhere," Mitchell snapped. "This bank has served truth or consequences for 20 years with honesty and integrity." Preston's smile never wavered. "Very well, we'll speak again tomorrow after you've had time to reconsider." With a tip of his hat that seemed more threat than courtesy, he departed. Mitchell noticed them watching and approached, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "Miss Edwards, good to see you, and your friend is?" "Maverick Everly," Maverick supplied, offering his hand. "Passing through town for quite some time now," Mitchell observed wryly. "I've seen you two around." He glanced over his shoulder toward the retreating figure of Preston. "I suppose you overheard that unpleasantness." "Enough to know you've made an enemy," Melody said. "Mr. Mitchell, Blackwell doesn't take rejection well, so I've heard," the banker sighed. "But some lines can't be crossed. He wants me to approve loans to his shell companies using other people's property as collateral without their knowledge. It's theft, plain and simple." Maverick exchanged a glance with Melody. "Mr. Mitchell, would you be willing to provide a statement about Blackwell's activities? Something official that could be sent to the territorial governor?" Mitchell hesitated. "I have a family, Mr. Everly, a wife and 3 children." "I understand," Maverick said. "But if Blackwell continues unchecked, what kind of town will your children inherit?" The banker considered this, then nodded slowly. "Come by after closing. We'll discuss what can be done." As they walked away, Melody gripped Maverick's arm excitedly. "This could be what we need." Mitchell is respected throughout the territory. If he testifies about Blackwell's methods, Blackwell will try to stop him, Maverick cautioned. "We need to be prepared." They spent the afternoon making preparations. Maverick visited the telegraph office, sending messages to his contacts in Denver and Santa Fe. Melody spoke with Mrs. Reynolds about securing an extra room in case Mitchell and his family needed somewhere to hide temporarily. At 5 o'clock, as the bank closed its doors to regular customers, they returned. Mitchell ushered them into his private office, where he had prepared several documents detailing Blackwell's attempts to manipulate the bank's lending practices. "This is just what I've personally witnessed," he explained. "I've heard rumors of similar tactics in Silver City and Las Cruces." "This is excellent, Mr. Mitchell," Maverick said, reviewing the papers. "With your permission, I'd like to include these in a report to." The sound of breaking glass interrupted him. From the front of the bank came shouts and the unmistakable smell of smoke. "Fire!" Mitchell exclaimed, rushing toward his office door. Maverick caught his arm. "Wait. This could be a trap." "Or it could be my bank burning down," Mitchell retorted, pulling free. They followed him into the main room of the bank to find the front windows smashed and flames beginning to consume the curtains. Through the broken glass, Maverick spotted several mounted men watching from across the street, Preston among them. "Get water," Mitchell shouted to his clerks, who were already scrambling for buckets. Maverick assessed the situation quickly. "This is a warning. They want to stop you from testifying." He turned to Melody. "Get Mitchell and his family to Mrs. Reynolds. Use the back door." "What about you?" she asked, concern evident in her expression. "I'm going to have a word with Preston," he replied grimly. "Go now." As Melody hurried Mitchell toward the rear of the building, Maverick drew his revolver and exited through the front door, directly into the street. The townsfolk who had gathered to watch the commotion parted before him. "Preston," he called, "this ends now." Preston turned his horse lazily, his expression one of affected surprise. "Mr. Everly, isn't it? I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." "Setting fire to the bank because Mitchell wouldn't play along with your schemes," Maverick said, loud enough for the gathered crowd to hear. "Blackwell must be getting desperate." A murmur ran through the onlookers. Preston's smile tightened. "Serious accusations, friend. You'd best have proof before slandering respectable businessmen. I have Mitchell's sworn statement about your attempted fraud, Maverick replied. And about 20 witnesses who just saw your men torch the bank. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Preston's face. He glanced at the gathering crowd, clearly larger than he'd anticipated. This is a private business matter that doesn't concern you, Everly. It became my concern when you murdered Thomas Edwards, Maverick said, taking a step forward. When you threatened his daughter. When you decided truth or consequences belonged to you and Blackwell instead of the people who built it. More townspeople had emerged from shops and homes, drawn by the confrontation. Maverick could feel the mood shifting, the fear that had gripped the town giving way to something like resolve. Preston sensed it too. He nodded to his men, who moved their horses into formation behind him. Mr. Blackwell doesn't take kindly to interference, Everly. This isn't over. With a final glare, he wheeled his horse and led his men out of town at a gallop. The fire at the bank was quickly extinguished, having done minimal damage. Word of the confrontation spread rapidly, and by nightfall, a meeting had been called at the town's small church. Maverick was surprised by the turnout. Nearly half the town squeezed into the pews, with Mitchell and his family seated near the front. I've sent Mitchell's statement and documentation of today's events to the territorial governor, Maverick announced. But until official help arrives, we need to protect ourselves. Blackwell and his men won't take this challenge lightly. A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. An elderly rancher stood up. I lost 30 head of cattle last month when I refused to sell my water rights to Blackwell. Sheriff wouldn't even take my report. My sister was attacked after she turned down a job at Blackwell's new saloon, added a young man near the back. One by one, townspeople rose to share their experiences, the dam of fear finally breaking. Melody watched with growing hope as neighbors who had remained silent for months finally spoke out. We organize a town watch, Maverick suggested when the stories had been told. Teams of 4, rotating shifts. No one walks alone, especially those who have spoken against Blackwell. The meeting continued late into the night as plans were made and volunteers assigned roles. When it finally broke up, Maverick escorted Melody back to the boarding house, both acutely aware that they had painted targets on their backs. "Do you think it will work?" she asked as they walked through the quiet streets. "Will the governor intervene?" "With enough evidence, he'll have to," Maverick replied. "The question is whether Blackwell will make his move before help arrives." "You've given this town hope," Melody said softly. "They're standing up because you showed them it was possible." Maverick shook his head. "You showed me first. Kneeling in the mud that night, you could have given up. Instead, you stayed to fight for your father's legacy." They reached the boarding house, pausing on the porch. In the dim light of the lantern, Melody's face was shadowed, but Maverick could still see the determination that had first drawn him to her. "I should go," he said, reluctant to leave her but aware of propriety. "First watch starts in an hour." "Be careful," she replied, her hand briefly touching his arm. "Preston won't forgive being humiliated publicly." "I'm counting on it," Maverick admitted. "The angrier he gets, the more likely he is to make mistakes." The next 3 days passed in tense anticipation. The town watch patrolled diligently, and shopkeepers who had previously acquiesced to Blackwell's demands now openly refused his men's business. A telegram arrived from the territorial governor, acknowledging receipt of Mitchell's statement and promising to send investigators. Maverick and Melody continued to gather evidence, interviewing townspeople and documenting Blackwell's patterns of intimidation and fraud. Their work kept them in constant proximity, and Maverick found himself increasingly aware of her, the scent of lavender soap when she leaned close to examine a document, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the resilient spirit that had survived such loss. On the 4th night after the confrontation with Preston, Maverick was patrolling with 3 other men when shots rang out from the direction of the boarding house. His heart lurched painfully in his chest as he sprinted toward the sound, the others following close behind. They arrived to find Mrs. Hanson on the porch, a shotgun in her trembling hands, and two men sprawled in the dirt before her. Neither was Preston, but Maverick recognized them as Blackwell's hired guns. They tried to force their way in, Mrs. Hanson explained, her voice remarkably steady for a woman in her 60s who had just shot two men. Asked for Miss Edwards specifically. Maverick's blood ran cold. Where is she? In her room, I believe. I sent my boy Edgar out the back to fetch help when I heard them at the door. Maverick took the stairs two at a time, calling Melody's name. When he received no answer, he tried the door to her room unlocked and empty. Panic threatened to overwhelm him until he noticed the window, open to the cool night air, and the rope fashioned from bedsheets hanging from the sill. "She's gone out the window," he reported to the others who had followed him upstairs. They must have had men watching the back as well. A quick search of the room revealed no signs of struggle, but her few possessions were gone, including the derringer. Maverick clung to the hope that she had escaped rather than been taken. The town was searched thoroughly, but as dawn broke, there was still no sign of Melody. Maverick, exhausted and increasingly desperate, was considering where to look next when a young boy approached him outside the cafe. "Mr. Lady asked me to give you this." He handed over a folded note before darting away. Maverick unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unmistakably Melody's. I overheard Preston's men planning to burn the boarding house with everyone inside. Couldn't risk Mrs. Hanson or the others. Heading to Blackwell's ranch to find evidence that will end this once and for all. Don't follow, this is my fight too, M.E. Cursing under his breath, Maverick folded the note and tucked it into his shirt pocket. The Blackwell Ranch lay 15 miles north of town, a sprawling property that served as the headquarters for his operation. If Melody had been captured or, worse, gone there deliberately, she was in grave danger. He found Mitchell at the bank and quickly explained the situation. "I need to borrow a horse. Thunder's good, but he needs rest after the past few days." "Take my bay," Mitchell offered immediately, "and this." He handed over a small leather pouch. "It's not much, but it might help." Inside, Maverick found a deputy's badge. "Where did you get this?" "It belonged to our last real sheriff," Mitchell explained grimly. "Before Blackwell's men replaced him. Might give you some authority if you need it." Maverick nodded his thanks, pinning the badge to his vest. He gathered supplies, quickly ammunition for his revolver, a canteen of water, and a spare knife that he tucked into his boot. As he prepared to leave, several of the men from the town watch approached. "We're coming with you," declared Samuel Reed, the blacksmith whose daughter had been assaulted by Blackwell's men. "Miss Edwards stood up for this town. We owe her the same." Maverick studied their determined faces, the blacksmith, a rancher, a shopkeeper, and Mitchell himself. Men with families and responsibilities, willing to risk everything to stand against tyranny. "It'll be dangerous," he warned. "Staying silent was more dangerous," Reed replied. "We just didn't realize it until you and Miss Edwards showed us." With a nod of acceptance, Maverick mounted Mitchell's bay, and the small posse rode north out of truth or consequences toward the Blackwell Ranch. The property came into view by mid-afternoon, a sprawling hacienda-style main house surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. From their vantage point on a ridge overlooking the ranch, Maverick counted at least 10 men moving about the grounds. "Too many to take head-on," he murmured. "We'll wait until dark." As the sun set, Maverick outlined his plan. "Mitchell and I will approach from the east near the main house. Reed, you and the others create a diversion at the bunkhouse. Nothing too obvious, maybe a small fire in the stable, just enough to draw attention while we search for Melody." The men nodded, their expressions solemn in the gathering darkness. "If anything goes wrong," Maverick added, "ride for town. Get word to the territorial marshal. Don't try to be heroes." They moved into position as night fell, the ranch's windows glowing with lamplight. Maverick and Mitchell crept toward the main house, taking advantage of the shadows. They had nearly reached the back porch when a scream pierced the night air, a woman's voice raised in pain or fear. Melody. Abandoning caution, Maverick sprinted toward the sound, which had come from one of the outbuildings, a small stone structure separate from the main house. The door was locked, but a narrow window provided a view of the interior. What he saw chilled his blood. Melody was tied to a chair, her face bruised but her expression defiant. Preston paced before her, a riding crop slapping rhythmically against his palm. Behind them, a wall of filing cabinets stood open, papers scattered across a large desk. "You've been quite thorough," Preston was saying. "Mr. Blackwell will be most displeased to learn how much information you've gathered. Names, dates, amounts, it's all quite damning, isn't it?" He gestured to the papers. "If this were to reach the territorial governor—" "It already has," Melody replied, her voice steady despite her obvious pain. "Copies were sent days ago." Preston's smug expression faltered momentarily before he regained his composure. "Then I suppose there's no reason to keep you alive, is there?" Mitchell touched Maverick's arm, drawing his attention to the approaching glow of lanterns. The diversion had worked, drawing men from the bunkhouse toward the stables where smoke was now visible. "Now," Maverick whispered, drawing his revolver. With a powerful kick, he splintered the door's lock and burst into the room, Mitchell close behind him. Preston whirled, the riding crop falling from his hand as he reached for his gun. "Don't," Maverick warned, his revolver aimed squarely at Preston's chest. "I'm faster, and we both know it." Preston froze, his hand hovering over his holster. His eyes flickered to the shining badge on Maverick's vest. "Playing lawman now, Everly. This is private property. You're trespassing." "And you're holding a woman against her will," Maverick replied coldly. "Mitchell, untie Miss Edwards." As the banker moved to free Melody, Preston's hand inched closer to his gun. "You think you've won. Blackwell has judges and politicians in his pocket. This ends one way with you in a pine box." "Perhaps," Maverick acknowledged. "But first, I'm taking Miss Edwards and the evidence she found. Then we'll see what the governor has to say about your operation." Preston's eyes darted to the scattered papers, calculation evident in his expression. In that moment of distraction, Melody lunged forward, now freed from her bonds, and swept the papers into a leather satchel on the desk. "It's over, Preston," she said, her voice strong despite the bruise darkening her cheek. "Blackwell's empire ends here." Preston's composure finally cracked. With a snarl of rage, he drew his revolver. Maverick fired first, his bullet striking Preston's shoulder and spinning him to the ground. The man's gun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as he fell. "You should have taken that stage to Santa Fe," Maverick told him grimly, kicking his weapon aside. Shouts and gunfire from the direction of the stables indicated that the diversion had escalated into a full confrontation. Maverick bound Preston's wound roughly, then secured his hands behind his back. "Can you ride?" he asked Melody, concern evident in his voice as he took in her injuries. "Better than he can now," she replied with a nod toward Preston, the ghost of a smile on her lips despite her obvious pain. They made their way out of the building just as Reed and the others galloped up, leading spare horses. "Time to go," the blacksmith announced. "We've got about 2 minutes before the rest of Blackwell's men realize what's happening." Maverick helped Melody onto one of the horses, then hauled Preston unceremoniously onto another. With the evidence secure in the satchel tied to Melody's saddle, they rode hard for truth or consequences, the sound of pursuit fading behind them as they gained the main road. They reached town near midnight, a crowd gathering quickly as word spread of their return. Preston was locked in the makeshift jail, under guard by members of the town watch. Mitchell took charge of the evidence, securing it in the bank vault until the territorial investigators arrived. Mrs. Hanson immediately took Melody upstairs to tend to her injuries, shooing away Maverick's anxious inquiries with assurances that the girl needs rest, not more excitement. Dawn found Maverick on the boarding house porch, exhaustion weighing on him but sleep elusive. The events of the past weeks played through his mind the storm that had brought him to truth or consequences. The woman he'd found kneeling in the mud, the unexpected bond that had formed between them as they fought against overwhelming odds. His reverie was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Melody stepped onto the porch, her bruised face softened by the early morning light. She wore a simple dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and moved carefully, mindful of her injuries. "You should be resting," Maverick said, rising to offer her his chair. "I've rested enough," she replied, though she accepted the seat gratefully. "Mrs. Hanson said you've been out here all night. Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Too much on my mind. Preston, he'll face justice." "The territorial marshal is due to arrive today." Maverick leaned against the porch railing, studying her face. "Why did you go to the ranch alone? You could have been killed." Melody met his gaze steadily. "I overheard them planning to burn the boarding house." There wasn't time to explain or gather help, and she hesitated. "I was tired of others fighting my battles. This started with my father. It needed to end with me." "You're the bravest person I've ever met," Maverick said softly, "and the most foolhardy." She laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at her bruised ribs. "Perhaps, but we succeeded, didn't we? Blackwell's operation is exposed. The evidence can't be ignored." "Yes," he agreed. "It's over." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the town come to life in the early morning light. Shops opened, people moved along the boardwalks with a new sense of purpose and pride. Truth or consequences was reclaiming itself. "What will you do now?" Melody asked eventually. "Return to Colorado." The question caught Maverick off guard. In the urgency of recent events, he hadn't considered what came next. His assignment was essentially complete Blackwell's operation exposed, evidence secured for the territorial authorities. "I suppose I should," he said slowly. "My business here is finished." "I see." Melody's voice was carefully neutral, but he caught the flash of disappointment in her eyes before she looked away. "Unless." Maverick hesitated, uncertain how to express the feelings that had grown in him over these weeks. "Unless there was a reason to stay." "Such as?" She looked up at him, a fragile hope in her expression. Instead of answering immediately, Maverick moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands gently in his. "When I found you kneeling in the mud that night, I thought I was helping a stranger in need. I didn't expect." He paused, searching for the right words. "I didn't expect to find someone who would change everything." "Everything," she echoed softly. "I've been drifting since the war," Maverick explained. "Taking jobs, moving on when they were done, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "But here with you, fighting for this town, it felt like purpose, it felt like home." Melody's eyes filled with tears. "Are you saying you want to stay in truth or consequences?" "I'm saying I want to stay with you," he clarified. "Whether that's here or somewhere else, if you'll have me." For a moment she was silent, and Maverick's heart hammered in his chest. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Melody smiled the full, radiant smile he'd glimpsed so rarely. "I think truth or consequences could use a new sheriff," she suggested. "Someone who stands up for what's right, even when it's difficult." Maverick grinned, his hand moving to the deputy's badge still pinned to his vest. "Are you offering me a job, Miss Edwards?" "I'm offering you a home," she replied softly. "The job is just a bonus." As the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the town they had fought to save, Maverick Everly realized that his search was over. The drifter had found his anchor in the most unexpected place, in a woman's courage, in a town's resilience, and in the love that had grown between them against all odds. 10 years later, truth or consequences had transformed from a town under siege to a thriving community. The general store, once again Edwards Mercantile, stood at the heart of Main Street, its shelves stocked with goods from across the territory and beyond. Sheriff Maverick Everly completed his morning rounds, tipping his hat to townspeople who greeted him by name. A decade of fair and steadfast law enforcement had earned him the respect of even the most skeptical residents. The badge that had once been borrowed now belonged to him by right and by the will of the people. He paused outside the store, watching through the window as his wife helped a customer select fabric. Melody Everly's expertise in running the business had expanded their inventory and reputation, drawing customers from neighboring settlements. The bruises from that long-ago confrontation at Blackwell's ranch had faded, but the determination that had seen her through those dark days remained, tempered now with contentment. As if sensing his gaze, she looked up, a smile spreading across her face when she spotted him. She excused herself from the customer and met him at the door. "Right on time," she said, reaching up to straighten his collar in a familiar gesture of affection. "The children will be home from school soon. How's Matthew feeling?" Maverick asked, referring to their 8-year-old son who had been battling a cold. "Much better. He insisted on going to school today, said he couldn't miss Miss Parker's history lesson about the territorial days." Melody's eyes danced with amusement. "Apparently, she's teaching them about how truth or consequences stood up to the notorious Blackwell Gang." Maverick chuckled. "History already makes a man feel old. Speak for yourself," she retorted, though the gray beginning to thread through her chestnut hair belied her protest. At 37, Melody Everly had lost none of the spirit that had first drawn him to her, but the years had added layers of wisdom and joy to the woman who had once knelt in the mud, believing she had lost everything. "Papa, Mama." The call came from down the street where 9-year-old Emma Everly was racing toward them, her school books clutched in one arm, her free hand waving excitedly. Behind her, moving at a more dignified pace, came Matthew, the image of his father with his mother's thoughtful eyes. Maverick caught Emma as she launched herself into his arms, lifting her high despite her growing size. "Easy there, deputy," he teased, using the nickname that had stuck since she declared at age 4 her intention to follow in his footsteps. "Miss Parker says you're a hero," Emma announced importantly. "She says you and Mama saved the whole town." "Is that so?" Maverick set her down, exchanging an amused glance with Melody as Matthew joined them. "She said you fought 20 men single-handed," Matthew added skeptically. "That can't be right. More like 5, Melody corrected, smoothing her son's hair. "And your father had help from Mr. Reed and Mr. Mitchell and others." "Still pretty brave," Emma insisted loyally. "Your mother was the bravest of all," Maverick told them, his arm slipping naturally around Melody's waist. "She stood up to bad men when everyone else was too afraid." Melody leaned into his embrace, the familiar weight of her against his side still sending a current of warmth through him after all these years. "We were brave together," she amended. "That's the secret, children. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about standing together when you are afraid." As they walked home together, the store closed for the afternoon. As was their custom when the children returned from school, Maverick reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From strangers in a storm to partners in both love and justice, their path had been neither easy nor straightforward. There had been challenges: the arrival of the railroad, drought years that tested the town's resilience, the growing pains of their family, but through it all, they had faced each obstacle together. That night, with the children asleep and the house quiet around them, Maverick and Melody sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge above the New Mexico landscape they had both come to cherish. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't ridden into town that night?" Melody asked, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. "Sometimes," Maverick admitted. "But then I remember what my mother used to say, that some things are meant to be, no matter the path we take to reach them." Melody smiled, lacing her fingers through his. "Like finding love in the mud during a thunderstorm." "Exactly like that," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I came to truth or consequences looking for information about Blackwell. Instead, I found everything I never knew I was searching for." As the swing rocked gently beneath them, Maverick Everly thought about the twists of fate that had brought him to this moment: the storm, the woman kneeling in the mud, the courage that had changed not just a town but the course of his life. The drifter had found his home, not in a place, but in the heart of the woman beside him and the family they had built together. In the distance, thunder rumbled a spring storm approaching from the mountains. Melody pressed closer, and Maverick tightened his arm around her, grateful for the rain that had once brought them together and for all the days, both stormy and fair, that lay ahead.